going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, I hope everyone's week is off to a great start. It's Monday, so whether you're joining us from the US or EMEA or somewhere else in the world, welcome, no matter what time of day it is for you. So to kick off this session, I'd actually like to start by posing a quick question, which is, have you ever been in a Miro board and wished for a specific feature or capability that didn't yet exist natively in Miro? Well, maybe you have something specific in mind, and we'd love for you to share it, in the chat. But the reason I ask this is because this is precisely where Miro apps come in, and specifically, it's where the Miro Developer Platform comes into play, which is a way to expand on the capabilities and use cases that are already possible in the Miro that we know and love. So, real quick before we jump into today's, content, just a brief note about me. My name is Will Bishop, and I'm a senior developer advocate here at Miro. I'm really passionate about web development and the interconnectedness of the web, which is why I'm super excited to dive into our web SDK today and show you how you can create an awesome Miro app of your own. So what exactly are we going to be building? Well, in this session, we're going to be mostly focused on building a Miro application that's accessible from within a Miro board. And we're going to do this using our SDK. For those of you who are new to the Miro platform, this webinar assumes little prior knowledge of our developer capabilities, but that's not to say that it won't also be helpful for those of you who might already have some knowledge of our platform, of course, and we'll get into some examples and inspiration at the end as well. I also want to add that in case you miss a step along the way, we're going to be sharing a recap and on-demand version of this webinar afterwards. So fear not, you'll be able to pause me, rewind me, etc. after today. So first, just a quick overview. What are we going to actually go through today? So to start, I'll quickly tell you about the Miro Developer Platform, which we'll be leveraging. Next, we're going to dive into some of the finer details around the local environment setup and creating a boilerplate from the command line. Next, I'll raise some important points in the Miro Web SDK development. And then I'll walk us through some example Web SDK methods and how to style a Miro app. And afterwards, we'll have time for a bit of community inspiration and Q&A. And before we dive in here, just want to make sure that the chat is disabled, it appears, but in the meantime, we can use the Q&A as a way to ask questions. So let's default to using the Q&A for any questions you have along the way. And we'll make sure to take time at the end too to get to all of those open ones and any new ones as well. All right, so moving right along. First things first, we're going to ground today's session in talking about Miro's developer platform, which refers to the combined power of our Web SDK, our REST API, and our live embed. So while we're going to be focusing, primarily on the Web SDK, which is our front end, capability that allows you to create an app that runs directly on a Miro board, I do want to say that there are other capabilities as well. So although we won't get into too much detail on our REST API and our live embed specifically right now, for those of you who are curious, you might consider using these for use cases around, integrating Miro with a third party or embedding Miro directly on a web page, respectively. So all three of our main capabilities live separately from each other, but just keep in mind that these can be, and often are, used in combination to build creative solutions that leverage one, two, or all three of these options. So with that in mind, let's get back to the Web SDK. A bit more detail about our Web SDK. This is a JavaScript-based library that is accessible from directly within your browser's developer console on an open Miro board. So we also offer an NPM package to be able to create a new Web SDK app directly from your command line, and we'll show you this shortly as well. So what does a Web SDK app actually look like? Well, the look and feel of an SDK app will vary depending on the styling and the functionality, but you will find all SDK-based apps are accessible from the left-hand side of a Miro board. One thing to note, however, is that only your own apps will be accessible to you from here. In order to make an app that you develop accessible to all Miro users from the toolbar, you would need to publish your app on our marketplace, which we'll talk a bit about later on. So these all these apps can have their own, custom UI, modals, and so on. And you can access these directly from this left-hand toolbar on a Miro board. All right, so let's dive in, starting with getting our local environment up and running for our Miro application. So what do you need for this? Well, it's quite simple. As long as you have a Miro account and an IDE or a code editor, you can follow along as I create a developer team and an app in Miro. So we're going to start by using the create-miro-app NPM package. And this is just basically our node package manager for being able to bootstrap an app from the command line. So as a next step here, I'm going to go ahead and open up my code editor and the terminal on my local machine, and then go through the create-miro-app command. So we're going to shift gears here just a little bit. And let me just quickly share my code editor. One moment. All right. So right now you should see my VS Code, and I'm going to go through here and start by opening up my terminal in VS Code. Whoops. Here we go, new terminal. And we'll just make this a bit bigger so everyone can see it. All I'm going to do is I'm going to start by navigating into my desktop where I'll create a directory. And I'm going to call that, like I've already created something called SDK webinar to hold this new project that we're going to create. So I'll go to this folder that I've already created, SDK webinar. And then within here, I'm going to actually run the npm command, which is npx create-miro-app at latest. And it's really important to include the at latest designation here so that you make sure you're getting the latest version of our npx package. So if we go ahead and hit this, it's going to then prompt us to fill out some details about the app that we're going to create. And for today's purposes, I'm just going to call this, SDK webinar. And this will be the name of our app. And then it's going to ask us what kind of framework we want to use for our app. And we get a few different choices here. So we have, React, we have vanilla JavaScript, Vue, we have a Miro node client library with Express. That's specifically for our REST API. And then we have a Next.js framework with the web SDK and API client installed already. And I'm going to use this last one, the Next.js framework. Just to keep in mind, we're not going to use the REST API portion of this, but because I like working in Next.js, this is the one I'll choose. I'm going to go ahead and select TypeScript for the language. So hit enter there. And then this will start kicking off the construction of our project and all the dependencies. So we'll give that just a moment. All right. And then once this is done, you'll see that in your terminal, there's a section that says create your pre-configured app in Miro by clicking on the following link. So what we're going to do is click on this link, and this is going to open up a new page. And let me just quickly show what this will look like. So in our Miro app settings, it's going to prompt us to create a new app here. So it takes us directly to the UI from our terminal, and it's got the same name as what we used from the command line, which is SDK webinar. And we want to select the team that we're going to create this under. We'll hit create app. And just to mention that if you had never created a Miro Developer app before, you might see one smaller prompt before that asking you to create a developer team, in which case you would just hit continue, and then you would see the create app button. So once you're done with following this prompt here, it's going to take you directly to your Miro app settings. And from here, I'm just going to quickly run through some of these details. So this generates a set of credentials, so both a client ID and a client secret, that is uniquely tied to this app that we're creating right now. And there are fields for both the Web SDK and the REST API on this app settings page. But today I'm just going to cover the Web SDK specific settings. So the first one is the app URL. So this is where your app will actually be living, where it's hosted, and where we're going to pull in the app functionality from. So for today's purposes, we're using localhost, but if this was a production app, this would be like an HTTPS URL where you're actually hosting your application. Next, we have the redirect URI for OAuth 2.0. We won't use this right now because that's for the REST API, which we're not going to use. And then lastly, we have the permissions section here. So you can think of this as essentially scopes for what your app can actually do and manage. So essentially, for this boilerplate app, we've only checked off boards read and boards write, which means that the app we're creating will be able to view and manage board items on behalf of anyone who's installed the app. So with that, the next step here is to actually install and authorize this app that we're creating. So I'm going to go ahead and hit install and make sure that you select the team under which you want the app to actually work. I'm going to select this April webinar team, and this is the meaning that this is the team that our app will have access to. Hit add and allow, and we can see that our app has been installed. So now that we have our app installed and configured, we're going to go ahead and go back to our code editor and review just a few of the details there. So within our code editor, I'm just going to drag this project in from my desktop, quickly navigate through where I created it. And if I drag this in to VS Code, we'll see here, one moment. Let's see, I'll just open this from here, file open. All right, so we've got our VS Code open, and what I want to point out is that we've got all of these different files that were created from the pages directory, public styles, all of our kind of standard Next.js pre-configured files, as well as a handful of Miro style, Miro specific files. But to kick us off, if we go into the pages directory, I want to show you the index.tsx. And this is really the meat and potatoes of our app. So it has all of the functionality that we're going to use to leverage the Miro Web SDK. And if we go down to the bottom of this file, we'll see that there is a kind of boilerplate text like, congratulations, this is your first app. And this is what's going to actually be returned in the UI. So once we actually get our app up and running, this is what we're going to see on localhost. But before we get to that, I also want to point out this .env file. So here within this .env file, we have a few pre-configured variables that we're going to need to leverage, being our client ID and our client secret, which comes from our Miro app settings page. So I'm going to go back to the Miro app settings page that we were just working with, which is this right here. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the client ID and the client secret. And I'm going to paste that into my .env file in my code editor. So copy my client secret. And back in our code editor, make sure we hit save once that's done. And we're good to go there. All right. Now, the next thing to do is actually run npm install to run our dependencies. So I'm going to open the terminal once more. Go to view, terminal. All right. Within my project, CLS, we've got all these files available to us. Now I'm going to run npm install. And then I'm going to run npm run start. And so we can see that our project has been loaded on localhost. So if we go to the browser and we go to localhost 3000, we should see this basic generic kind of boilerplate UI. And from here, we know that our app's up and running. We've successfully generated this project from the command line, but the next step is actually going to be launching this from within a Miro board. So how do we make sure that our app is accessible from a Miro board? Well, after we've authorized and installed our app under our account, as we did already from the app settings page, there are a few other things for us to take note of. So going back to our slides here, I'll just quickly cover some of these details. And the first thing I want to mention is that Miro apps built with the Web SDK are launched from the left-hand toolbar, as we mentioned earlier, and this is accessible from within any open Miro board. However, to ensure that an app you've created actually appears here in the toolbar, we need to do three things. One, we need to make sure our app is running, which ours already is. Two, we need to ensure that it's subscribed to the icon click event for the Web SDK, which we'll do in just a moment. And three, we need to confirm it's been authorized and installed under the team to which our open Miro board belongs, which we'll go through as well in just a second. So if each of these three things is true, then our app should appear in this left-hand toolbar when it's fully extended. So I'm going to walk through all three of these requirements now. First, let's cover the icon click event. So in order for an app to be accessible from the left-hand toolbar, it must be subscribed to this event. And if it's not, then Miro is going to consider it a headless app, so to speak, and therefore it won't appear to end users in Miro because there wouldn't actually be an icon for them to click to launch the app from the toolbar. So this is only something to worry about if you're creating an app from scratch without our npx create-miro-app command. If you're using the create-miro-app command to generate your app like we did already, the icon click event is already included in the index.js file by default. So no additional action is necessary. I'm just pointing this out in case you decide to take things to the next level and incorporate Miro into an existing app of your own or create something really truly from scratch. And the other thing I want to share here is, we can actually show you where directly in the documentation you can find more details about this in case you're following along later. So if you go to our documentation and you type in icon click, you'll see the very first option is add icon click to your app. And this article walks through exactly how to do this. But as I was just saying, this is only necessary if you're doing this from scratch. If you use the app that we're using here today, I can show you where this function actually lives, which is in our index.tsx. So in our index.tsx, let me just make this a little bit bigger. If we go down to approximately line 38 inside this React use effect, there's going to be this window.miro.board.ui.onClick event, which listens for the open panel for the Miro app. So this is already here in our app. We don't need to worry about it. All right, so now that we've confirmed that we have this event listener icon click, we already have our app running, as we can see here in the terminal. And we should be able to access this from the left-hand toolbar. So let's go back to our Miro board. And then from there, we're going to go to our Miro account home here. I'm going to go to the team that I authorized the app for already, which was this April webinar team. And then I'm just going to go to a test board. And then here, we can see that there's this little plus button on the left-hand side. You can also see that it has like a tiny blue dot above, where you see the more apps option. If you click this, this lets you know that there's a new app for you to check out. And then right here, we see this SDK webinar app with a little blue dot above the icon, also just kind of signifying that it's a new app we haven't played around with yet. So if I click on this, it's actually going to pull in through localhost 3000, the exact same content that we're seeing there, but directly into our Miro board. So, this is just kind of the full flow for understanding how to actually create the app, get it running on localhost, and then most importantly, how to actually access it from within Miro. All right, so moving along. Now we want to go through and actually add some more kind of functionality to our app. And before we get into that, I do just want to quickly acknowledge that I think the chat is disabled, but what we'll do is I'll finish this demo portion, and then by the end, we'll try and adjust some settings so that that's open. But don't worry, if you have questions, we will make sure to get to them at the end and make sure that that's accessible. But for right now, you can still continue to use the Q&A feature if you have any questions so far. All right, so moving right along. So as I was saying, we've bootstrapped a basic Miro app from the command line using the create-miro-app command. We've launched it from a Miro board, but now we'll take it a step further and add some more functionality from the Web SDK to our app, as well as some styling. So let's start with adding some basic functionality. All right, so in terms of basic functionality, the first thing I would like to do is actually start with some styling using a Miro styled component that we call Miro tone. And, um, you know, we'll use a button to trigger some kind of event, like maybe like creating a sticky note or creating an image on the board, something, quite simple, but something to say like, when I click this, I want this to happen. So to add some styling and to add a button, we're going to go to actually a website called mirotone.xyz. And this is where we host our Mirotone library. So I'm going to go to mirotone.xyz. And here you can see this is essentially a CSS library which offers all sorts of great components for you to use out of the box. So just looking up and down here on the left-hand side, you can see we've got typography, icons, buttons, labels, everything running, really the whole gamut. But what I'm specifically interested in right now is the button component. So I'm going to scroll down to the button component. And then here you can see we've got all different sorts of buttons that are already pre-styled in the like Miro fashion, so to speak. And because we used the npx create-miro-app to bootstrap our app from the command line, the Miro tone CSS library is also supported by default. So we don't need to worry about adding anything else in terms of that. But again, if you were using an app from scratch or something that you already are building on your own, you could use npm or yarn to install Miro tone as well. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and copy this first button component, and we're going to actually just add this to our app. So we go back to our code, and if we go back to index.tsx, I'm going to go to the bottom here where we return the actual UI portion. And you can see that we have this A tag for being able to read the documentation, and it's just something that we don't really need anymore. I'm actually going to replace this with this button from Mirotone. Fix the formatting here a little. And then because we're in React or Next.js, we need to switch class to class name. And we'll call this SDK button, our first button using Mirotone. We'll hit save. And then if we go back to our board, we can see that this SDK button is now reflected here. So we have a button that's all working just fine. The next thing to do is actually add some functionality to this button when it's clicked. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and create a function that actually is going to add a sticky note to the board when we click on it. So I'm going to go up here and I'll call this function something like click handler. So say const click handler. And then we need to actually put some code in this function. But where can we find this code? What do we want to do? Well, I'd like to create a sticky note when this button's clicked. So what I'm going to do is actually go back to our developer documentation. And I'm going to go straight to developers.miro.com. And if I go to the Web SDK section, you'll see if we go down to our Web SDK reference, that there's all sorts of different board items that we can use. So we've got cards, connectors, frames, you name it, but I'm interested in sticky notes. So for this, I'm actually going to go ahead and basically just copy the code for being able to create a sticky note directly from our reference documentation. But the thing that we're really leveraging here is this .create-sticky-note method in our Web SDK. And by just simply copying this and taking it over to our code, I'll plug this in our click handler function. And then there's a few things we just want to tweak. We don't need the await because this is already nested within a React default function. And we do want to add window because we're not defining Miro at the top of this file. And yeah, maybe we want to edit some of the text. It says this is a sticky note. Let's just, change some things around. Sticky note from today's webinar. Make sure we remove this. Don't want that messing with our formatting. And instead of just a, typical light yellow sticky, maybe we'll do light blue instead. Now, if I get all this squared away, I can basically reference this function where we created that button earlier. So I'll add an onClick parameter. and we'll call click handler. Now, if we hit save, we can go back to our app. And here we've got our SDK button. Let's give it a shot. Okay, cool. So if we hit this button, we can see that a new sticky note's being added each time we click it. And that's because back in our code, we've got that new function, click handler, which is using the create sticky note method from our web SDK and calling that each time this button's clicked, which is pretty cool, right? There's a lot we can do besides creating sticky notes. And let's take it one step further. So instead of just creating a sticky note, maybe I'd like to add a second button, something that uses a different method in the web SDK. Maybe, instead of a sticky note, we can create some kind of image. So yeah, if we go to the image item here in our web SDK reference, we see that there's a similar kind of method for creating an image item, and it's board.createImage. And then we're able to pass a URL, update some positioning, and tweak things a bit. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and copy directly from the docs, basically. And then I'm going to go back to our code editor. And I'm just going to, basically do another button. Instead of something that creates a sticky note, we'll call this a different kind of button. What kind of image do we want to generate? If you're a cat person, you could generate a cat. If you're a dog person, you could generate a dog. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a button that generates an image of a pug each time that we click it. So I'll call this the pug button. And on click, I'm going to call a new function that we're about to create, which will be called, I guess we can call it image generator. Now I need to go up and actually make this function. And what I'm going to do is just copy what we have so far here. Whoops. For our first handler. And I'm going to add this down here. We'll call this image generator. And I'm going to get rid of all the sticky note specific stuff because we're going to be dealing with images. So we've got our image generator function. It's already being called down here on click with our new pug button. And just want to make sure that we have the right snippet. So going back to our docs here, I'm going to go ahead and copy this, take it back to our code editor, paste that in. And we're going to make the same tweaks as before. We don't need the async await here. We want to add window.miro.board to make sure that we're referencing Miro from the right context. And we can title our image. Let's change the positioning a little bit to make sure that it's not falling right on top of where our sticky notes are going. We'll say 100 X coordinate and 100 Y coordinate. And then we want a fun kind of image to actually use here. So let's go to some kind of royalty-free site like unsplash.com, and we'll try and find an image of a pug. And lots of great options here. I think this guy is really handsome. I really dig the jean jacket. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And then going back to our code, I'm going to replace this URL with our image of a pug. Paste that in, hit save. So now we've got this image generator function with all of these details specified. And we've got this pug button that calls our image generator function on click. So let's go back to our board and see what happens when we go there. All right, so we can see that our second button here is live, the pug button. And if we give that a click, we'll see that this generates an image of our friend from just a few moments ago. So, just like that, we can see that with one click of a button, a new image is generated on the board. So we've done a few different things so far. We have created a new button using the Miro tone library. We've added a function from the web SDK, such as the create sticky note or create image, so that when we click a button, that web SDK functionality is triggered. So, of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to leveraging the power of our web SDK. For today's purposes, we've, kept these steps kind of simple, but there are tons of different methods available in the SDK documentation, as you saw before. For many of these, we even have the sample code snippets, right there for you for a very low effort kind of experience. Some other simple things we could add could include things like, drag and drop functionality, adding a modal or some kind of notification. Really, the world is your oyster when it comes to, exploring our SDK. So with this in mind, let's jump back to presentation mode here. And, we've talked a lot about, what you can build, and I've showed you a few things, but rather than me continuing to walk through the individual methods available in our web SDK, I want to take a moment to share some inspiration from members of the Miro developer community. So first, we have two really amazing apps. One is called Super Search, one is called Easy Translator. And these were built by one of the members of our developer community, Vedran, who's a lead full stack engineer. And he's built both of these apps using our web SDK. And, in his own words, there's a lot of opportunity on the Miro platform. So, as an early adopter, Vedran successfully managed to build several apps. And he's really kind of, I would say, a success story of leveraging our web SDK, as well as, what he imagined people wanted to see, what kind of functionality people were looking for in Miro that maybe didn't exist yet. And so he came up with these two ideas. Super Search is an app that allows you to, search board content and filter it in all sorts of like really awesome and productive ways. And his app, Easy Translator, the name kind of speaks for itself. It allows you to select board items and translate them, all really, really cool options, and all built on top of our web SDK. Next, we have PowerPack, which was built by Max. So Max Harper is founder of Refractive Strategy, and they are a team that builds on Miro full-time with our web SDK and other capabilities as well. Another early adopter, Max has built several apps and plugins on the Miro platform, like PowerPack and the Colors plugin that's also available as part of it. Max and his creations are another great example of just how custom apps can empower specific workflows and leverage custom logic to elevate end users' experiences in Miro. And Max has built several other apps aside from PowerPack, but he's a real kind of genius when it comes to understanding how to use Miro to its fullest capabilities. So for these developers, who have bet on Miro and build on Miro, they are also given several opportunities from us as well. So for example, Vedran has written a blog post on his journey building on the platform and shared his experience with monetizing apps on Miro. You can read the full story on that on our Miro engineering blog. And we can see another example in Max, whose story has been featured in things like our community newsletter and other sources as well. So what's the gist here? Well, basically what I'm trying to say is you can do so much with the platform, and we really love to hear what you're doing and share those stories from our community and amplify them, to display the true power of the Miro platform. So ultimately, both of these developers built apps that focused on common requests from members of the Miro end user community. So if you're looking for ideas to get started on an app of your own, our community wish list is actually a great place to start. So this is where you can see the most requested features to inspire your next app or integration with the Miro Developer Platform. It's a place where users can upvote certain ideas, end users, and it's a really great place to brainstorm on what sorts of things might make for a good integration. So to round things out, a quick look back at what we've explored today. We covered each of these facets of the Miro Developer Platform. So we started with an overview of the platform and our web SDK. We talked about how to set up a local environment from your command line and bootstrap an app. We talked about launching an app from the Miro toolbar. We went over essential SDK methods and Miro tone, and we went through some community inspiration. So hopefully you're starting to feel inspired and understand exactly what it is you can do with our web SDK, and you're ready to keep the momentum going. So if you enjoyed walking through how to create your first Miro app from scratch, then I definitely encourage you to keep going with app development in general. In fact, we have an in-depth training published on developers.miro.com which walks you through how to take the app we built today and bring it to the next level. So creating a full stack experience that actually leverages both our Web SDK and our REST API. And this is a really great session to kind of continue learning. So we'll drop a link in the chat where you can see this, or rather, I'll drop a link in the chat in a moment. And then if you're looking to get your hands dirty, please don't hesitate to leverage all of the resources of our developer community. So you can find me on the Miro for Developers Discord server, as well as meet other developers building on Miro. It's a great place to get inspiration, support, feedback, etc. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment now to make sure we can enable the chat. So bear with me one moment. I'll throw on some nice light tunes. Any questions, you can go ahead and throw them in chat. I can also see that we had one question in the Q&A from Tristan. Will the terminal commands be available in the presentation when it comes out? Yes. So you'll be able to find the terminal commands also on developers.miro.com. So let me throw a link in the chat there right now. That's where you can find everything we've been through today, developers.miro.com. And for the terminal commands specifically, Tristan, you can just type in npm or create-miro, and in the search bar for the docs, that should bring up the command that we used today. Renee had a question. How do you provide access from the Miro board to the local running app? Yes, great question. So when we did this earlier on, we did it from the app settings page. At the very bottom, there was an install app button below the permissions. So actually, we can show you really quickly what that looks like. So if you go to Miro, you go to your developer team where you created the app. My app was called SDK Webinar. And at the very bottom where it says install app and get OAuth token, this is where we actually make the connection between our board itself and the app that we're creating. Yes, and we'll be sharing a link to the presentation afterwards as well in a follow-up email for anyone who attended the session. And yes, a link to the Miro Discord, definitely we can share that as well. So if you go to our Discord server, whoops. Actually, I'll grab that for you right now. One moment. All right, so dropping the link to the Discord in the chat here. So this will be your one-stop shop for being able to chat with me, my team, other people in our community, other developers, etc. And then I'm also going to go ahead and share all of the other links right now from everything else we covered. So let me just paste this in. Oops. So these are just some of the things that we went through today. So I'm sending links to Mirotone, some of the apps that we covered, etc. And yeah, to round things out too as well, I'll say that we are going to be sharing a lighter on-demand version of this webinar afterwards, so that if you missed anything today, you're able to watch that and do it at your own pace, etc. We had another question, which was, is there somewhere where I can get ideas for a new app and features that people are looking for? Yep, this is another great question. So if you're interested in what's coming down the pike for the Web SDK, you can actually go to developers.miro.com, which I'll do right now. And then up on the upper right-hand corner, we have our roadmap. So here we have a public-facing version of the things you can expect to see coming, things that are in progress, things that were released. You also have the option to submit your own idea and submit your own feature request. And the more things that we get feature requests for, and the more like votes they get here, the better it helps us to understand exactly what you guys are looking for. You can also check out these sample apps that Marco shared in the chat as well. These are another great place to get started. We have them categorized by the capability. So sample apps for our Web SDK, sample apps for our REST APIs, and sample apps that feature both. So kind of full stack apps. Awesome. Great. And I think that's just about all the questions. It's been awesome, yeah, hosting this webinar with you all. And can't wait to see what you all build on Miro. Please join our Discord, reach out, join our YouTube channel. Yeah, find us where we are. And we can't wait to keep inspiring you and helping you build the next big thing. So thanks for joining today and have a great rest of your week.